All right, everybody. Hello, and I hope that you can hear me and maybe not see me, but oh, that's because I have my thing down there. Um, it's a little bit different. We're live streaming on Facebook this morning. I'm going to do a very, very, very brief introduction. I just want to alert you to the fact that the nutritionist is returning in April. We'll be running April through September. Today's webinar we're hoping, going to be very interactive. We're running it both live here and on Facebook, which is a new experience for us. We have several of our distributors and our team members joining us. Presently, we have Huday Kavustran from Turkey, Sean Lee from China, Lynn and Sam and Tom, all here from AMTS, Ignacio Riano from Argentina, Marcos Ramos from Brazil, Marty Traxler from Mexico, and I'm not going to say much more. We're going to have all of our speakers can turn on their video if they need to or would like to when they're answering questions. Tom will definitely have his on. Tom's focus today is going to be on trying to formulate with extremely high feed costs and what we hope is high milk price, at least here in the US, but just some formulation strategies. He's going to demonstrate some of the program features with some of the information that we have received from around the world. Ask questions. This is going to be a little bit different than our nutritionist webinars. We are going to stop and take questions during the course of the webinar. So either put them in the question and answer window or in the chat window. I'll be monitoring both. Lynn is monitoring our Facebook page for any of you who are joining through Facebook. And without any more blather, I will ask Tom to take over and start speaking.
Well, good day, everyone. Marianne just told me what I was supposed to talk about. Watching her face, seeing if I'm going to get a funny reaction. Before we actually get into some of the stuff with the program, and because it's going to focus on some of the tools that exist within the program to help us make some of these decisions. What I want to start with is I'm going to I'm going to build a story. We all look at, we all hear bits and pieces of what is going on. And when you start putting all these pieces together, there are some very, very troubling things going on that are going to impact everything. I really hate to say it, but I'm going to try and leave politics out of this conversation completely, but except for this comment that we are not being told, the general public is not being told everything that's going on in a coherent story, and we are in for some, what I think are some major shocks to the system. I'll be 54 in a couple of weeks, and I can't think of a time where all of these components have come together at once to hit the global food supply in one fell swoop. This is concerning. When I started, the whole idea behind doing this webinar was actually based on some of the things that I was seeing over the last month, and it really, folks, we're in for some crazy times. There's no better way to state it. It's going to be a wild couple of years. When we look at everything that's impacting us, and if we think about this just from the agricultural world, supply chain issues, be it from on-farm equipment, in-mill equipment, ingredient supplies. This is not really getting any better, and with some of the things, especially when we get into electronics, controls and such, we're far away from it getting better. Fuel prices, we look at what fuel prices have done over the last year, but then you look at what they've done over the last couple of weeks. We'll come back to those. Feed prices, we're going to talk about a fair bit about. Labor prices going up all over the place. Drought in places of the world, South America, the western part of the U.S., and everything that's impact that's had on supply and planning and everything. Fertilizer prices. Now I'll say this right now. It used to be that fertilizer, if we look at like anhydrous, what was related to the price of natural gas. Well, they're finding now in the last several years it's being linked more to the price of corn. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of wild, but now with what natural gas has done, fertilizer prices are probably back to tracing that. Pesticide, herbicide pricing and availability. Here in the U.S., at least, processor limits on milk production. Some of the big co-ops have a couple years ago started implementing a self-described quota system, and trying to expand production gets tricky. And then you add environmental regulations in parts of the country and parts of the world on top of that. And then the latest one is war. This is just like the one of the final insults on injury. And then interest rates, with where inflation rates are, we're going to see more and more interest rates hikes as central banks try and control inflation. All of this is hitting us at once. It's you start pulling these pieces all together, and it's pretty scary. Let's talk a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ukraine first, because this really is going to I want everyone thinking about how we're going to handle some of these things. When we look at wheat exports, Ukraine accounts for about 12% of the global wheat exports. Most of that, as you'll see, is going to the Middle East and Turkey. And where's that all going to come from now? We'll come back to that. Russia right there at 17% too. So there's 29% of the global wheat exports that are in pretty serious condition right now with geopolitical issues. Corn exports. Here's an interesting one. I didn't realize Ukraine had gotten this big in corn exports. 17% of the global exports are coming out of Ukraine. Sunflower seed. Boy, now we're talking real big issues. Between Russia and Ukraine, there's about 80% of the sunflower exports from those two countries. That's a lot of volume, folks, and it's got to be made up somewhere. If we look at, let's see, yeah, there's still, in terms of what was supposed to be exported from the Ukraine, there's still a third of the wheat that was supposed to be exported from the country, and about 45% of the corn was still meant to be exported. Russia, they still had 9.8 million metric tons to export. That's pretty much off the market in most cases, especially things coming from Ukraine. We're seeing a slow and continuous destruction of infrastructure, but there's some other concerns with the Ukrainian market. Fifth largest exporter of wheat. And if we look at where most of that wheat is grown, that's these dark blue areas and lighter blue areas. This is pretty much the areas that are, if we include around Kiev up here. So this whole region of Ukraine is what's been intimately if I go into presentation mode, I've never been able to figure out how to do it with Zoom so that I can actually control things correctly. I'll try, but folks, this is Zoom and PowerPoint sometimes have weird weird relationships of, so we'll see. Let's see, now it's gonna make me think I'm working on this screen. Oh, that's okay, because, okay. So we are, so these are primary areas that are not only wheat, but corn. And if we overlay on top of this, areas that have been impacted by the ongoing war, military intervention, depends where. You can see these areas are right in the midst of our wheat and corn production. Corn production a little bit further north, but again, right where those areas are that are being contested. This sucks. Where's that wheat go to, both from Russia and from Ukraine? Okay, so we look at some of these countries. Well, we look at Israel, 24% of their wheat from Russia, 28% from Ukraine. Turkey, 10% of their wheat from Ukraine, 65% from Russia. I mean, these are some of these countries are not the most financially prosperous to be trying to displace this from with higher priced wheat from other countries. We're getting set up for something ugly. Corn exports. This is an interesting from the Ukraine. Look at what Ukraine has done to grow their export destination to China, at the expense of the rest of the European Union, basically. A large percentage of the Ukrainian wheat corn crop ends up going to China. So this is what's going to be the impact of this. China will end up having to come into the open markets and try importing that from South America or North America. So we'll see definite price sensitivities being coming into the market because of that. Okay, some things from the news. This was from a week ago. Export licenses for key commodities. Okay, so Ukraine's going to try and keep as much food within domestic as possible to feed their population. Makes perfect sense. We look at several ag commodities that Ukraine has suspended of exports. Rye, oats, millet, buckwheat, salt, sugar, meat, and livestock. So just all of this contraction in global supply coming at us. Sunflower oil. You look at Ukraine represents the majority. 46% of those exports globally come from Ukraine. A lot of that ends up going to, like a lot of the sunflower oil, goes to India for cooking purposes. So what are they going to replace that with? What's that going to do for pricing on the oil side of everything? Well, there are replacements. Look at that. Number one, the thing that they replace sunflower oil with in most of India is palm oil. Where's that going to come from? What's that going to do to all of the sustainability efforts and palm and deforestation due to palm plantations? Also, soy oil they will use. But at the same time, with soy oil, especially here in the US and in Europe, we're seeing a lot of competition for that for biofuels. So we have this food energy competition all starting at the same time. Getting ready for crops and everything in the Ukraine, okay, the northern hemisphere. One of Ukraine's largest ag companies, a number of its company managers have been killed in northern Ukraine and Kiev. Another one saying they aren't allowing their workers into many fields because of safety issues. Another one, 50,000 hectares of its land are currently occupied by Russian artillery. Wow. So even if the war ended right now, let's say that they're meeting about a ceasefire and they agree, how long is it going to take for all of this equipment, for all of the damage that's been caused to infrastructure, fields, whatever, to allow Ukraine to start coming back to normality? Last year, Ukraine had record grain crops. This year, short of fertilizer, pesticides, and even if they can get those, they don't have the fuel to work with. They're suggesting that we could see food and feed prices jump 20% just because of this, of what's going on in Ukraine. And UN is worried that we're going to see global food shortages, global malnourishment. That's going to happen. We're in trouble. So let's see if we look at where we could make up some of those losses from. Well, Hungary, Argentina, Turkey placed restrictions of exports on key food products, arguing they need to keep enough supply for their own populations. China's holding back on rice exports, and they're buying a lot of wheat. Beijing already holds half the world's wheat supply in storage and is panic buying. Now, there's also some concern in the US government that China might be stockpiling all this wheat and then be able to sell it at higher prices and build it into part of like the Silk Road Initiative in some of the countries that they are working with. We don't know. There's a lot of things here that I don't think we've ever been in a case like this. Then we add things like this. In the US, we're seeing a slow but progressive increase in number of poultry flocks that are being infected with this new strain of avian influenza. So that's causing depopulation in some areas. So what's that going to do to meat supply, both chicken and turkey? Here's the scary one. This was from late last week. Consumer Price Index showed food prices in February, just in February, up 8.6%. We're just at the beginning of this. You think about how long it takes for food from the beginning of production until it eventually reaches the consumer, and for all of these prices to catch up. This is the beginning. It's going to take a while. Australia, record wheat yields in parts of the country, massive amounts. You know, there's some reports of in areas of dryland wheat in Australia of 3, 4, 5 times normal yields. Great. And they export, 10 to 15% of the global wheat trade. But they don't have the infrastructure to export it. They're South Australia, they're already operating at full capacity. So even if there's all this additional wheat, they can't move it out. There's been ports closed, there's been rail capacity lost because of the droughts that have happened. But investors are afraid to invest because of this drought and flood cycle that Australia is under. And that's impacted the domestic wheat price. Okay, northern New South Wales wheat's only $215 a ton, whereas the global wheat price was $315. That price difference is because it's supply chain constraints where they can't get the wheat from the internal part of the country out and export it. At the same time, in Australia, look at what's happened to fertilizer price from $330 to call it $1,200 a ton. Cost of production, oh boy, not pretty. Electricity, we're starting to hear some reports on this. This was in a news report over the weekend I read from Italy, where a steel producer actually had to shut down a couple of their ovens because of the price and availability of electricity. It's the first time that mill had shut down any ovens since World War II. And they were the electricity, a large percentage of electricity in Italy is from gas production, natural gas, and that natural gas was coming from Russia. So we have a whole other set of challenges that are going to impact us in agriculture. We look at some pricing. This is really wow. This was yesterday's. I captured this data yesterday. So this is soybean meal. Is dollars per short ton. Over $500 for March meal, and this is actually the May graph. You can see, it was kind of stable here, about 360, 370. Had a little bit of a bump here in late January. That was when the reports were coming out about how poor the South American crop was. That caused us a spike. That was significant and was a market shock. And then the last couple of weeks, this is all primarily due to what's happening in Eastern Europe. One set of numbers that don't make sense to me, and I want everyone to think about these as we go through this talk, and as you think about this, and it's one of the things I really want you to do, is I don't want to scare people. I'm just trying to pull these things together in somewhat of a coherent story. And I want you to think about how these impacts are going to work over the next 12 to 24 months. Yes.
I have a question.
Yep.
Has this been changed to global commodity prices, or is this reflective of just U.S. prices?
This is Chicago board.
Okay.
So this is, you pretty much, as we look at ingredient prices, especially commodity prices like this, pretty much everything follows, at least follows the same trend as what the board prices do.
But it is U.S. dollars per U.S. ton.
It is U.S. dollars per U.S. short ton. Yep. Yep. And I think in some areas we're going to see these prices even be more negatively impacted, as in going up like this, because of some policies that have been put in place the last several years, either by governments or by retailers, limiting, for example, no soy from Brazil because of rainforest destruction, or everything with GMOs. There's sort of building yourselves into a little box when we get a major shock to the system like we're in. I'll come back to those shortly. These prices, we get into new crops, so SEP, OC, DES, and forward. These prices don't make any sense to me. I cannot, for the life of me, understand how they can be trading at these levels. This is when we take into consideration that we're just beginning spring work, and with what fuel prices have done and everything else, and the forward thinking on the impact of supply because of what's going on in Ukraine. It's baffling to me that these prices are at these low levels. Okay, I'm going to say that I think these prices, I think all these fours that they start with, probably we're going to see them change to fives as the growing season progresses. There's a lot of hope on soy that we would see recovery in Brazil and South America coming out of the droughts, but who knows? There's a lot of unknowns when we get out into these later markets, and I think that can provide us with a strategy to talk about with farms. Soy, whole soybean by itself, again, same type of trend on pricing on what's happened. South American news initiated this spike, and then we get into Ukraine. And again, numbers that really don't make a lot of sense when we get out into new crop stuff. Corn, same thing. We're talking, so $7.50 corn is about $300 a metric ton. These are kind of unheard of numbers for us to be dealing with. And historically, if you think about what we have historically seen with feed pricing or insults to the industry, it's usually we have an energy issue or we have a protein issue because of supply and demand. So either corn's supply is really high and price comes down, and then bean price has to adjust to that for the next growing season. It's pretty rare, I think, that we see all of the commodities, everything being hit with the same insult and responding exactly the same way. So the whole field has gone from one level to 2x, and everything we're at this new base level for right now. I have no idea how long it's going to last.
Okay, Tom, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt.
Yep.
There were a couple comments.
Yep.
One of the, perhaps an explanation of some of those prices is that in March, farmers report planting intentions. So it may have shifted due to fertilizer prices. And Marty indicates, or just reminds us that the first USDA crop report of the year will be released April 4th.
Right. And a lot of that is still based on planting intentions or what was actually planted. And when you look at some of the supply and demand numbers that came out, it's interesting, Marty. I went through those reports yesterday, and they all came out. They all came out within like the first 1 or 2 days after Russia invaded. So none of those global supply demand reports that USDA published the end of February include anything about the loss of volumes coming out of Russia and Ukraine. Fertilizer prices actually are, I don't think they're stable. I think they're moving around again, with especially with how much I read this news tidbit from Brazil. So much of their fertilizer is ammonium nitrate based, coming out of Russia. So there's that whole supply chain is not pretty right now. So like I said, we are in the beginning of all of this, and I don't like the direction it's taking, and we don't know. I'm not usually a pessimist, but this scares the hell out of me, folks. Now, class 3 milks. Okay, so this is primarily milk that would be going for cheese. It's not really how we're paid, but this is how it's traded. So these are US dollars per 100 pounds of milk. So if we take that May milk at $24.16, that's going to be the same as 24.16 times 2.2, 53 euro cents a liter, or 53 US cents a liter. These are unbelievably awesome milk prices. If and like dairy farmers, we're going to look at the milk price and be like, yay. And then the feed bill comes and they go, boo, nutritionists, what are you doing? Drop feed price. I'm going to say this. There is an opportunity here this year for farms that have their shit together. They can make a lot of money coming up over the next 12 months, 15 months. But there's a lot of cost control that needs to be considered with that. Live cattle futures. Now I did this one more for the indication of how the industry is seeing where future feed prices are going to go. Because if we look at, we can't expect, I think that the fed cattle futures probably has a little bit more built in of what feed values will be because of how long these cattle are on feed. And you look at this from November of last year till yesterday, the price of cattle for February 2023 has gone up from about $135 to $152. Okay, that's a significant increase that people are starting to build into those values. Now, this also comes into play with cattle numbers. With the drought that's been going on in the western part of the U.S., cattle numbers are lower, but I think there's also some of this built-in insurance in. One of the other things that concerns me with the futures prices on commodities, and I don't know how much of this is going on right now. Historically, in the U.S., when the stock market is falling, a lot of hedge fund managers and investment bankers will move money from stocks to commodities. We've seen this happen in the past where it's become pretty much decoupled with reality, where we could see, a buck a bushel on corn maybe that was artificially inflated because of all these hedge fund managers from Wall Street. I don't think we've seen that shift yet. Again, we're early on in this and what's going on. Freight, fuel prices. Everyone you get on social media and everyone's pissing and moaning about gas price or diesel price when they go fill up their car. Well, let's think about it from a couple of perspectives. So this is, I took, I just figured out for a silage truck. Okay. A lot of the US, we use, instead of wagons or in tractors, we use either straight axle or straight frame or tractor trailers to move silage around. So I took what is pretty typical around here, a straight frame truck that has measured capacity of about 15 tons of silage in it. And I used the average miles per gallon that's reported for over the road trucks. So this is probably high for farm trucks, probably significantly higher than what reality is. And then just looked at what is the difference in fuel charge per ton between $3 a gallon, which is kind of where we were, to $5 a gallon, which is kind of where we are, and actually higher than that in many places for diesel fuel. And if we look at it on a per ton basis, we're basically doubling the rates. Now, as we get these farms, this is one-way direction. So here we're talking an additional $1 or $2 a ton, or one way. So we really have to double this, $2 to $4 a ton, just for hauling silage from the field to the bunks. Okay, this starts to add up when these larger farms, when they're going 40, 50 miles one way to get feed, which in parts of the country they do. Suddenly we're going from we're adding $3 or $4 per ton just in fuel. Okay, we're going to come back to forage issues shortly. If we look at the cost per ton on a 25-ton load per 100 miles, okay, that's the way I did this. At $3 diesel fuel, it costs about $2 per ton per 100 miles. At $5, we're almost $3.50. All right, so that's you think about how much freight we move everywhere. Look, it doesn't matter where you are. When we start looking at adding 2 to could be $10. Look at hell, we're talking additive effects of freight coming at us from everywhere. So really getting these farms, and one of the reasons I did this was we need to be talking with our producers about how to maximize their fuel efficiency on farm. That's huge opportunities, I think, especially when we're dealing with these prices. Fertilizer, let's see, this was from Texas, a producer in Texas in 2021. His corn fertilizer was $142 per acre. 110 of that was nitrogen. 2022, his costs are double, 291, with 235 per acre being nitrogen alone. So when we start looking at what's going to be the break even on for corn growers, in light of these fertilizer prices alone, we were already approaching probably around $6 break even. Now we increase fuel prices. This is why I don't think we're going to see those new crop prices that the board is trading at right now. I think we're going to be higher. This is from Ireland. Between oh, so this is just production cost. Okay, this is per bale of baleage between fertilizer, fuel, and plastic. They're thinking that they could be breaking 30 pounds per bale versus a couple years ago it was like 15. All right, I think they budgeted before all this started to happen. I think the budgets that came out of Ireland were $17 a bale. So we're seeing some spikes hit just as we're starting crop season in the Northern Hemisphere. Social media, things I've seen or heard. There was a producer somewhere in the Midwest standing in a field that was like, see this field? It's supposed to be soybeans, but it's not going to get planted this year because of price of costs. We look at in the western part of the U.S., water allocations becoming a big issue, where they're being limited to 2 acre feet of irrigation water for the year. To put that in perspective, corn requires about 5 acre feet. So there's going to be portions, there's going to be some pretty big portions of fallow land because of these water allocations. Also, I've heard people throwing out numbers of $20 beans so that'd be $20 a bushel. So that would be about $600 a ton. $10 corn. $10 corn is going to be about $400 a ton. How the hell are we going to survive those kinds of increases? And when we look in the U.S., so this just came out a couple of weeks ago. Number of dairy farms, commercial dairy farms in the U.S. since 1992, where there were like 130,000. We are now down below 30,000. And with these types of prices, this trend we could actually see a pretty significant reduction again. The result is, the total number of cows in the U.S. really hasn't changed. All it's done is increase our cows per herd. This is nationwide. We're just seeing larger herds, which we've all known has been happening, and it's going to continue. Now, I don't even pretend to be an economist, and I won't say anything else about them. But from everything that's kind of being pulled together and the way everything's coming, we're going to see, I think we're going to continue to see high inflation for at least the next 12 months and probably longer. Let's face it, if the Ukraine war were to stop today, how long will it take for them to be able to start recovering in terms of crop production, infrastructure? What kind of damage has been done to the ports? We don't know. And that's not to say the sanctions against Russia would be dropped immediately. We don't know how long those would last. So all of these things kind of build. We're I don't think there's a crystal ball that could even begin to tell us what direction this is going to go. And the sad thing is, when we look at like the official U.S. inflation numbers that get reported, they don't include food and fuel. Now, the one I showed you, the 8.6%, that was based on the consumer price index. So that at least includes a little bit of it. We're getting led to something where we could see some pretty high true inflationary numbers. Looking at where new crop, corn, soy, I don't care where you are in the world, corn, soy, wheat, canola, rape. I think this is one of the areas where that has been really underutilized by our farms. Should we be investigating options? If these things are traded at like the Chicago Board of Trade, or pick your trading marketplace, whatever, should we be looking at options? And the nice thing about options is it's kind of like an insurance policy. You don't have to have the full price of something to cover margins and everything. We're just paying this premium that's going to, if it's positive for us, then we get paid for the value. If it's a negative, then you just let the options expire and you're just out the cost of the premium. So there's, I think, a lot of opportunity for farms and mills to be looking at doing things with options at this point. It might be a pretty safe way to do it if there's enough volume traded to make the premium prices financially correct. There's some of these where the volume of option trades is so low that it makes no sense. So then we would be looking at more traditional contracting. But I really think that the industry, we really need to be looking at these, not so much for what's going to happen over the next 3 or 4 months, but as we start looking at over the next 6 to 8, 12, 18 months, before the rest of the market really everything starts to come together and move against us. You know, what kind of impact can we expect? I did this little example just for giggles. And I did chickens because they're kind of easy. So let's say that in October 2021, the price of feed for broilers was $250 a US ton. Let's say now it's $400. Well, it takes about 10 pounds of feed for the first 6 weeks of life. So that was for October, that was $1.25 total in feed. For March, $2. That's a 60% increase. So that is, if we take a US company that harvests 5 million birds a week, that's 3.75 million in increased feed costs per turn of birds. Okay, so that's for every week they've got to address this difference, this 3.75 million. Now at 70% yield, okay, of a chicken, which is kind of the average for broilers, this 75 cents difference in total feed costs would equate to about 30 US cents a pound of bird in the grocery. So I looked up yesterday what the current market price near me. It was $1.49 a pound for a whole chicken. We add that 30 cents, we're $1.79. So that's a 20% increase in price just due to feed. Now let's include the logistics and everything, the fuel charges and everything. You know, could we really be looking at 40, 50% increases in some food prices this year? That's what we don't know, and that should scare the hell out of all of us. if we just look at an example dairy diet, I threw this together quick yesterday just to show the point. If we use the old pricing, okay, that you can see here, total feed costs of about $7.21 or about 13 cents a pound of dry matter. If we use more current pricing, and I'll explain a couple of these numbers here shortly, you know, we're going from 7.21 to 11.88 a cow a day, 13 to 21 cents or 64% increase. Now you look at this big price difference on corn silage and alfalfa silage. Well, that is that especially the corn silage, that might even be low. One of the simple ways people have priced corn silage in the past is just 10 times whatever the board price is for corn. So that would put us up around 75 bucks. Alfalfa silage, you know, I just took the price of hay and divided it by 3, which depends on where you are as to what you pay for hay. But I think I used 300 or 350 bucks to do that price. Cornmeal, that's kind of what the market is around us in upstate New York right now, as well as soy and bypass soys are probably in that range as well. So, you know, we've got to be cognizant that the whole base has changed. That farmers have to, our producers have to recognize that you can't feed cows for $5, $6, $7. We've really got to be thinking in this, you know, who knows what number. It's going to vary wherever we are. At the same time, the lenders have to be made aware that, you know, they have to be, hopefully they keep up on this, that, you know, our benchmarks have to change because of what the market's done to us. Using that $11 or that 21 cents of per pound of dry matter, I just did a quick little graph here of just to break even for feed pricing. How many pounds of milk are we talking at different milk prices? Okay, so even though that we're seeing milk prices in this range of 24, 25 bucks, you know, you look at where our break even is just for feed, and we're in that 45 to 50 pounds, 20 kilos of milk. A couple years ago, that number would have been probably damn near half that. Okay, so our herd dynamics, you know, we've really got to be thinking about where are we on productivity levels on these herds. We've how's our repro, how's everything management wise that's really going to impact how we keep these cows at higher levels of milk, because we can't, you know, we've got to adjust our benchmarks that we use for making culling decisions, making decisions on when to dry off cows, whatever. With these increased costs of just feed to begin with, we've really got to make some of those internal adjustments, or else our farms could fall into some really dangerous financial losses pretty quick. So what can we do? Okay, so we're going to start off with forage quality. You know, if there's ever been a time that forage quality is going to should be at the forefront of all of our discussions, it's now again. Now, those of you that work with farms that buy all of their forages, I feel sorry for you. It's not going to be pretty, as we all know. For those of us that work with farms that produce their own forages, at least, what are some things that we can do? Okay, forage quality, right maturity, right dry matter. Are they doing, you know, an appropriate amount of fertilizer? Are they taking into account manure? Are they utilizing manure to the best capacity that they can? You know, we look at some of the challenges though, especially with alfalfa, with how much alfalfa that is now Roundup ready alfalfa. So are we going to see reductions in yield or quality because of the availability and pricing of glyphosate? are we even going to be able to get it and spray these fields? So we're going to see, I think, the potential for a little bit lower forage quality is definitely there. And then when we harvest it, I've never been a huge one using inoculants. I've been slowly changing the last few years because historically, when you looked at some of the financial side of it, they were break even. Well, that's not true anymore when we start looking at these higher costs of silage. So if we look at an inoculant that costs us, say, $1.10 per ton of treatment costs, and we'll say just from dry matter that it's going to save us 3% in dry matter for a nice size bunk, 90 feet wide, 200 feet long, 15 foot tall. The as-fed tons in that silo is 6,100. And that 3% of dry matter savings would be equivalent to 185 tons. It costs us about $7,000 in inoculant to treat that whole thing. And, when we were at $35 or $45 a ton for silage, it was pretty much break even. But when we start looking at, if we say corn silage now is $75 a ton, that value is almost $14,000. So 2-to-1 return on investment on that inoculant. If we take alfalfa silage and we get into that $90, $100 a ton, we could be talking 2.6 to 3 times return on investment. So that really, just from the dry matter conservation, can really have some nice impact for us on inventories, which will then allow us to feed more forages if we have the quality to manage these feed costs. Film, oxygen limiting film. Okay, for every half a foot or let's say for every 6 centimeters of rot that we visibly see on silos, that started out for, the rule of thumb 3-to-1. So in this case, that is equivalent to 617 tons as fed. And if we look at the loss in value, lost feed value from losing that much silage, 21,000, okay, $75 a ton, we're at $46,000. So anything that we can do to manage, to grow, harvest, and store our silages, to conserve as much dry matter, to conserve the quality, and be able to actually feed as much of that as possible, can really have some massive financial returns when we're dealing with feed prices like we are. And I think it's a whole area that people have not caught on to yet this year with these feed prices. The potential returns are massive when we're dealing with issues like this. Fuel use on farm, how many passes of tillage are really needed? Trucks and tractors being maintained correctly, and it even comes down to the right tire pressure. These are things that as a nutritionist, we don't typically consider. But when we start thinking about, it's going to cost us $6 a ton bringing in that silage or higher, what can we do? What discussions can we have with the farms to get them to look at how we can reduce that production cost, basically, so that we can take advantage of these milk prices and do even better. Manure management, as I said, fuel cost for application is going to be a killer this year. But then we really need to take into account the fertilizer value, and how many of us as nutritionists talk with the farm's agronomist or their nutrient management person on how can we go back and forth on maximizing, let's make sure we don't give up forage yield or forage quality because of fertilizer and fuel costs. Let's make sure that we're getting as close to or even better than we have in the past. And some of that is how do we manage manure and really take that into account from a nitrogen basis. And then think about it when you're on farm. And I'll throw these little tidbits out as I'm walking around farms. All the fuel usage. You see a tractor sitting there running at an idle while Joe's out getting a cup of coffee, or loading the spreader, and the tractor's on the spreader. All these things really add up to a lot of gallons of fuel, a lot of liters of fuel, which, when price was low, yeah, okay, we throw a little bit away, but we're talking real money now, folks. Other energy uses, because we're seeing electricity prices coming up. LED lights, timers, hot water use, fans, especially. We're getting into, as we come towards warmer season in the north. Fans, are they clean? How many producers actually go and look at their fans unless it's broken? But it's measured. I've measured it a couple times. With the blades being dirty, we can be talking about a 30% reduction in efficiency of air movement on those fans. If they're boxed fans with wire mesh over them, hell, we could be talking 100% loss in efficiency. So we're spending this money to try and cool the cows. Let's make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck. And it probably wouldn't be a bad idea on a lot of these farms to do energy auditing. There's a lot of wasted energy use on farms. Labor, not even going to talk. Sorry about that. My headset decided to turn off for some reason. Okay, labor, we're not going to talk about. That's a whole other topic yeah. Okay, so let's talk feeds. Now I'm going to call out all of my fellow nutritionists, and I'm also going to call out the feed companies and feed processors, because there's opportunities here. First, safety factors. It's really, we've got to be minimizing these safety factors this year. We just can't afford them, even with milk price going up. Why are we feeding, instead of, if this herd is averaging 40 liters of milk, why are we formulating a diet for them that's for 45? How much potential savings are there? Ingredient selection, and this is where I call out the feed industry and processors. Can we be looking at how do we change processing of feeds to get the most out of them? Great example in the US, with all of these bypass soy products. When 5 years ago, when soybean meal was less than half of what it is, that $30, $40 premium that they were putting on a bypass soy was 10, 15%, 15, maybe even 20% at times of the value. Now with soy at $600, and we'll say, and that margin still, that premium of $30, it's only a 5% increase in value. So that's going to change some of how we think about some of these ingredients, because that price differential is getting so close. What can we do from other sources? What could we do for processing, depending where we are, milo or sorghum? Are there more advanced ways we can process corn to increase starch digestibility? In general, in some of these areas, Europe is further ahead of us than the rest of the world, really. But there's still, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to be looking at spending, 5 to 7% more on an ingredient because of how it's been processed, and then be able to feed less of it and have a lower overall feed cost than if we were to use an unprocessed or a less well processed form of that ingredient. Definitely something that we need to be looking at. On farm with our formulations, are we defining the groups correctly within the program? Because suddenly if we see, do we really know body weights? I always got to come back to body weights, folks. Are we defining them correctly so that we can formulate for them correctly? Feed analysis. This is one where we probably, in times like this with higher feed prices, we probably should be sampling more frequently because we want to reduce that safety factor and have more of a precision fed farm. So that actually we should be doing more feed analysis and probably, and not just forages. I was going to say probably not, definitely not just forages. We should be looking at our commodities as they come in as well, because sometimes we find, and it's not so much to find the off-spec stuff. That's great, but it's more, are there opportunities for us to, if we're working with a sole supplier and we know that the sugar level on this beet pulp from this plant is 10% higher than it is from another plant, we definitely can take advantage of that in formulating if we have the data to work with. So more feed analysis. More for Europe again, with the loss of sunflower meal, is there enough rape supply? I don't know. And how quick can the EU respond to this increased demand? This whole issue of, like I said, of GMO status of any ingredients coming in is a challenge for definitely a challenge. The no Brazilian soy. This was primarily driven by the retailers because of Amazon rainforest. And limited animal protein use, starting to open up for some species, but there's millions of tons of sunflower that are most likely not going to be here. How do we balance that supply out? Replacement. Some of it's going to be, more rate. Some of it'll be more soy where possible. Some of it's going to be, how do we reduce safety factors? And then it's going to be, what other byproducts are out there? One of the challenges I've seen with byproducts that I've heard about in the EU is the areas that have methane digesters where they are paid so much to produce electricity that they have driven up the price and have reduced the availability of a lot of byproducts. I don't know, folks. This is going to be, let's go back a few slides and talk about forage quality being the #1 driving factor on this. And then formulating, defining the groups well, formulating to reduce safety factors is going to be critical in these situations. So I'm going to switch over and show you a few things in the program.
While Tom's doing that, I'm just going to remind you all that this is being recorded. I expect to have it up on our YouTube channel by the end of the day. I put that link in the chat window, and I expect Lynn will want to put it on our announcements. So if you have to jump off, you won't get a chance to ask questions, but it'll be there for you to watch later.
All right, let me get my...
If anybody has any questions right now, we can field them, but because I know Tom can multitask. Are you ready, Tom?
I am ready.
Okay.
Okay, so I just did, this is a file that I have where I play with optimization, pricing, and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's just an example diet, an example cow for, let's see, what have I got her in here at? 45 kilos of milk, okay. 26 kilos of dry matter intake. I've got a whole bunch of feeds thrown in here, ranging from, our forages to some high moisture, to ground maize, several different types of bypass soys. That's not a good sunflower to use. It's formalin treated, but that's okay. We'll work with that. Distillers, gluten feed, bakery blend, rape, a pretty wide range of groceries available to put in the basket. And one of the things that I want to show you is not so much, because some of this we need to be making decisions or thinking about decisions for ingredients, and what can we actually do, and not so much a diet specific. I'm going to formulate, this is going to be my, the ingredients I use, but let's look at it from like the 10,000 meter perspective of what kind of pricing should we be considering. And that is actually a tool that we built a couple years ago, and it's called the feed pricing analysis tool. Now, there's several versions of something like this out there. It's if you've heard about the feed val, if you get Progressive Dairyman, you'll see there's always an article in there, either from like Patrick French, who's or from Ohio State, where they show similar type things. We all do it a little bit differently, okay? But we all use, for the most part, a similar approach. And we've done it when our approach is a little bit different. So just you should be open. There you are. All right. So let me get this up here. So what it does is we can take any ingredients that are in the farm file. We can take them down by feed type. And the first thing we'll do is just based on all right, so we can do this comparison first based on just standard nutrients, so like crude protein, starch, NDF. And what this actually does is it's basically a multiple linear regression, folks. So it's looking at, the independent variables are whatever we select for our nutrients. Okay, so in this case, crude protein, NDF, and starch. And then it predicts what the value of those feeds are. And then it ranks them and this predicted over actual. So anything in red is saying that the actual price is greater than its predicted value. And you can see I've got a pretty wide range in here. Okay, so this is, I've got cereal grains in here and I've got protein feeds in here, and I do this for a point, because when we turn this over to using a recipe, so in this case, we're starting with a recipe, and we run each ingredient basically through that recipe to generate an ME value, an MP value, fermentable values. So let's take out.
Tom, I'm going to interrupt you a second.
Yep.
2 questions regarding this and a comment from Marty. The prospective plantings report will be released on March 31st for anybody here in the US. And a question, could you explain the advantage of the feed pricing analysis compared to the shadow pricing in the linear optimizer? And And Marcelo asks, and I think that was on the first run through before you put it through cows, why you don't just choose the ME and MP. So explain when
Okay.
and why you can't do that.
Okay. So when I run this, I'm always running it through an existing recipe to be able to do the ME and MP. The reason I started off by showing just standard nutrients, that is the way a lot of people think, Marcelo. When we look at how a lot of people make decisions, should they buy soybean meal versus canola meal? Everyone thinks about this relationship between, or they'll price things on a crude protein equivalency basis. It's simple. It's the way it's always been done. And it can lead you down the completely wrong direction. When we look at these ingredients as they're included within a diet and actually look at, what is well, as an example, let's take corn. Let's take ground corn versus a really good steamed flake corn or corn run through an expander. Traditionally, if people just do it on a starch basis, which is the way they would do it, they would never look at paying for increased processing because that adds cost. And the cost per unit of starch would clearly show that the ground corn was the cheapest. But when we look at it in relation to a recipe and the actual model evaluation of that, suddenly we get completely different values because, like we'll stick with this corn example. Instead of just looking at starch, if we look at MP that comes from that corn, then we start to see that, hey, you know what? This corn has a lot of MP coming with it because of not just the protein that comes with the feed itself, but all the microbial growth that it supports. So we get all this additional, we're basically looking at what is the value of that feed to the cow that she absorbs. So our rankings can come back very different and give us some really great different perspectives in looking at ingredients. And let's see, that is the wrong price on that feed. So I'm going to kill that. So, I've only got 15 feeds here in this example. Okay. And I'm doing it just off of ME and MP. And just those two nutrients account for 75% of the variability in feed pricing that we have in this example. Okay. So that's pretty cool. We're definitely getting, we're explaining a fair amount. Oh, come on, where did I click?
So Tom,
yes,
circling back to the question about the shadow pricing.
Shadow pricing is a completely different shadow. Okay, go ahead.
Oh no, he just it indicated that optimization takes into consideration things like microbial protein, etc. So I guess hit on the shadow pricing comparison, please.
Okay, so shadow pricing can be very useful, but shadow pricing, the way shadow pricing works is within this set problem. Okay, let's say we have this recipe that we're working on, and what that shadow pricing is telling us on an ingredient is, given that nothing else changes, this is either this ingredient has to be below this price to come into the formula, or it'll stay the same amount within this price range. Okay, so it's looking at recipe specific, only one variable changing, and if the price of another ingredient changes, then that shadow price that you were looking at for that other ingredient is now invalid. It's not to say it's a bad thing. There's definitely, if we're looking at making a decision on one or two ingredients, it can be very powerful, and definitely can give us some indication of, is that a favorable ingredient to use or not. This is to look more at the overall basket of ingredients that's available to use.
Okay.
So, and I think that's the biggest difference.
And Tom,
Yes.
the comment there about the accounting or not for microbial protein, let's say if you brought in a bunch of fermentable starch, the method in which we estimate MP in both tools is similar. So we're accounting for that value of something like a corn grain with minimal crude protein or metabolizable protein in itself.
Absolutely.
And because we're actually running it through your diet, that's why you have to select a recipe and a cattle group, because that's how we're getting our estimations to essentially linearize that MP aspect, or any model derived value, MP, microbial or even amino acids, et cetera. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So
as you go along, and I know you'll get to this, you'll explain the color coding on the right side. And then there's a question about rumen protected amino acids in this context, which you may be getting to all of those.
Okay. Tell you what, Marianne, why don't you explain the color coding while I visit the little boy's room?
Yeah, all right. So the color
I won't
coding,
take my microphone.
The predicted over actual color coding will actually gives you just a gradation of whether it's good pricing or poor pricing. You can actually sort that column. Any of these columns can be sorted by clicking on the diamond shape next to it, and you can tell that Tom has sorted by the predicted over actual because it turns into a triangle when you use that as your sorting mechanism. Red is going, and hopefully people aren't colorblind, because I know that afflicts 12.5% of the male population. Anyway, that will give you an idea of whether red is bad, green is good. So as you go down through that, you can see that rapeseed potentially is very overpriced, whereas the corn distillers, ethanol is in a better price range, and then even better is the corn high moisture, 28%. So hopefully that answers those questions. How fast can he visit?
And I can kind of help out with that second
Good,
question.
Sam, thanks.
Yeah. So with the use of this tool, when you are looking at feeds like a protected amino acid, it's really only bringing one thing to the table. It's not necessarily going to do a great job of ranking that specific feed within the broad range of feeds that we have here. So something like protected amino acid it's really only bringing that, methionine, lysine, et cetera, to the table. Not going to necessarily help out in this tool unless your pool of feeds are basically bringing in the same thing or are as limited in what they're bringing in. So you want to kind of compare like feeds within like feeds when you get to those very targeted type of feeds. But when you're doing sort of the more commodity bases or the more understanding your value of something like a protected soybean meal or your proteins, that's where this tool can be a little bit more helpful. And Tom probably caught the end of that, so he can kind of help.
And I'll say that the better way to evaluate the rumen protected amino acids is the amino acid supplementation tool on the recipe screen.
Yeah, for those targeted ones. Yeah.
And we can show a little example of that too. So this, yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Well, I would just say I would kind of extend that example there. If you were going through and trying to determine what types of feeds are going to be my most efficient way of bringing in MP or ME, running something like your different energy feeds and your different protein or protected protein feeds, that's going to be a good use of the tool. Don't necessarily think that bringing in a protected fat is going to really fit well with that specific analysis, because sure, the fat may be a bunch of ME, but it's not really valued in the marketplace based on MP. So it may not fit in that specific analysis. In that case, you may want to go pull in more of I'll call it an energy run, where you're going through and trying to figure out, just for its energy basis, is that protected fat worth it? So
yeah, that's a good point, Sam. And if we let me add on top of that, because we've run across this in the past when people have done optimizations of formulas. You know, we'll get this. I should have saved some of these. I probably do have them, where I don't understand why it's bringing in, you know, so much of this protected amino acid. It's driving up costs tremendously. Well, this is where the nutritionist hat has to really come on, folks, because some of these amino acids are fat protected. And if your diet is limited on energy and it's trying to find the best way, you know, we're already maxed out on fermentable starch, you know, fermentable sugar, whatever, and it's going to reach for something like a fat product. Well, when there's no other fat product available to be evaluated, it's going to use the only other fat source that it has. And in that case, it was a rumen protected amino acid, which was a very, very expensive source of fat. So you've got to pay attention as you're making these, you know, your ingredient selections, as well as setting realistic constraints on some of these feeds. So let me just finish up with this. This is a great example here of, you look at the value. So the market price of canola, $352 a metric ton, or 500, or what is it, 488, whatever that worked out. Yeah, I think I put 450, but its predicted value is only 351. So canola meal's severely overpriced. You know, if we look at, here's another good one, soy. Okay, we're at 89% of its value. But then, given, again, comes back to where I was saying that the marginal increase in ingredient cost because of increased processing, suddenly we look at, you know, something like Soy Pass, Soy Plus, Amino Plus are all in that same ball game. You know, their values are 105 to 110% of predicted.
Tom,
So
can you explain how that predicted value is calculated?
that predicted value is, in this case, it is a simple regression where we've got ME and MP as our independent variables versus the actual price. So it's basically it's price equals X times the ME concentration plus Y times the MP concentration of the feed. So it's really it's nutrient driven to evaluate what that price is.
It's based on, it's determining what the price per unit of ME and MP is, it's basically assuming that all the feeds you've loaded into the analysis determine the market price. So the cost or the price of ME and MP is valued based on the collective analysis, and then each individual feed can be analyzed against that.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, sorry while I'm interrupting. So one of the persons asking, but I thought we're using the CNCPS. It calculates for amino acids, not only MP, as cow absorbs amino acids. DDGS, for example, is a very poor protein ingredient when looking at amino acid content and amino acid digestibility. And while you're answering that, could you use the same exercise to examine those protected amino acids using the MET and lyse to MP down further in the nutrients window?
Well, okay, let's run it a couple different ways. So
yes,
right now, okay, what nutrients are used in the analysis you can select, and right now I've only got ME and MP. Okay, we can add. So this is, if I didn't have a recipe here, this would be MET CP. So that would just be the methionine composition of the ingredient. Running it through a recipe like this is actually calculating the amount of methionine that's flowing as the MP. So it is that absorbed amino acid basis. So if we add, let's just add lysine and rerun it and see what happened to our distillers. Is a great example of see, distillers went to being completely overvalued. Okay, it went from being one of the highest valued feeds to being actually the lowest value feed because of how low that lysine content is. Absolutely. And if that is the level that we want to make these decisions on, then yeah. And I actually, when I value something like distillers, that's actually how I'm kind of valuing it, is including that lysine, and it's got to be cheaper than the price of corn, folks, and typically it's not. So that's challenge. But again, it also depends somewhat on what animal group we're feeding. If we find that distillers could fit very well into heifers or dry cow diets, let's look at using these ingredients instead of having one mix on a farm. Maybe we definitely need to be looking at a couple different mixes to more closely match the animal requirements of the different groups that we're feeding. It's actually, showing us, this is kind of showing us that we actually have to be a little bit more complex in our formulation and on-farm feeding strategies from an economic standpoint, which is a good thing because we're more closely matching the animal's requirements, which is good economically, it's good environmentally, it's good animal health-wise. So definitely we can be looking at some other things. If we include protected amino acids, I think I've got a couple in here. I've only probably got a couple in here. Yeah, I got. So let's see.
So Tom, while you're searching, I'll explain. There are a couple questions that I can even answer. Yes, the predicted price will change as the recipe changes, and as whatever nutrient you're looking at changes, as Tom just demonstrated with the lysine MP with corn. And then a question is there a way to have just the ration feeds in the analysis? Yes, there is. You tick and untick the feeds that you're feeding. But I would hazard a guess that you could do the optimizer on the recipe screen for that sort of analysis. And this way you're looking at ingredients other than already included in the recipe. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah. Okay, so I don't have updated pricing on a lot of these, so let's kick out those two because I don't have pricing. All right, so yeah, in terms of just doing it on methionine and lysine, look at that. M and ML are right there at 100% of value. Interesting. So it's again, I don't think doing the protected amino acids in this format is the best way to do it. That really never was the kind of the objective with this tool. It was, as Sam said, to look more at commodities that to be able to, or all feeds, to be able to look at a relative comparison of potential value to make these to make buying decisions. So that is one tool that we can use. Another tool that we can use, and it's one that we don't talk about a lot, but I personally really like this, is this optimize with parametrics. And we can do one or two variables. Doing one variable at a time is easy to explain. Doing two variables at a time can get really messy to explain. So let's just we'll do one, and we'll do canola meal, and we're gonna do it from 0 to 4 kilos in half kilo increments. So what that's going to do is it's going to hold all the other constraints constant, both ingredient constraints and nutrient constraints for this recipe. And it's going to run, its first run will feed no canola, The second run will feed a half a kilo of canola, then 1 kilo, and on and on and on until we get to the 4 kilos. And this is just through the linear optimizer at this point. So there is that to consider, and it puts them all into ration shots. And you can see if we come down to the canola, so 0, 5, 1, 1.5, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so let's look at the easiest way I look at these results is I will do canola versus, let's do income over feed costs and look at it as a chart. So with the ingredients that are available, our highest income over feed cost is actually when we don't feed any canola. And there's a $1 a cow difference in income over feed costs going from 0 to 4 kilos of canola. Again, pretty wide selections of feeds that we've been able to select from in this example. If we pull out, well, let's do another one because probably a more realistic one would be, yeah, I know my dry matter's up there. Let's do sunflower from 0 to 4 kilos in half kilo increments. And we'll do the same thing. We'll just throw it up as a graph. And look at income over feed cost. Okay, so similar type directionality as we are with the canola example. But again, I've got lots of soy.
Sorry, Tom, a couple things to interrupt, and this one's important. Please go slower. It's a challenge to follow you sometimes.
Okay.
And then I'll just add in a couple of requests as you move through the process. Can you, when you explain the amino acid tool, check the convenience of using MetaSmart? And can you optimize with soybean meal and sunflower together and interpret? So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's take out.
And I wasn't paying attention. There's a suggestion to try with amino acids that will work. I'm not even sure what that's referring to. I was like, I can't multitask. You can.
See, I think I've got all soy products out of this now.
Just as you're kind of working on that, just to say this is using the linear optimizer.
Yep.
And so it's, when we start talking about amino acids and some of the more model derived output, just understand there is always that we're essentially trying to linearize a nonlinear model. So there is that challenge.
All right, so I have all soy products taken out. And let's just do, yeah, that's what we want to do. All right, so we will run it with, we'll do two. We'll do soy from 0 to 4 in half kilo steps. And then we will do with sun as this example from 0 to 4 in half kilo steps. It's going to take a minute because there's 81 iterations that it's got to do. Not even going to look at the table. This is
All right,
crazy.
while it's doing this, I'm just going to mention to the people watching on Facebook, you too can put in questions or directions in the chat window, and we're monitoring that as well.
Okay, so here is just soy versus income over feed cost. And if we were to draw a line through it, there's really no shift. Okay, so the question is, this is the range in sunflower inclusion rates. So let's look at the sun. Yeah, kind of. This makes it really hard to explain. So we go from 240 to 540. So let's see. Well, let's go from 0 to 0. So 0 to 0. If we look at so this is going to be, oh, that's a soy first at 0. Okay, so it'll be easier to look at that way. So from the 0 soy from to sun, we can see that it increases income over feed cost, but as soon as we introduce some soy in there, the increased levels of sun actually decrease income over feed cost. I'm just looking at this income over feed cost line here. So this first from here to here is all sun, no soy. Then we add, let it have some soy, half a kilo of soy, and not much difference. Then we go to a kilo of soy. So as it's looking at it, let's go all the way over to the right. So as we go, come all the way over. So this is 4 kilos of soy. And now this would be the incremental amount of sunflower. We can see that income over feed cost goes down as we increase the amount of sun. So it's we're really, and if we compare these to the 0 soy, just using sunflower, if we take this first one here at 549 income over feed costs and compare that all the way to the beginning with the 0 soy and the maximum amount of sun, we actually see that we have a significant, we're significantly higher, 499, there we go, 499 versus 549. Okay, so we're actually significantly potentially money ahead using soy instead of sun. And we can let the optimizer itself make those, the advanced optimizer make that final decision. But that is a pretty clear directionality thing that sun is really not that great of a feed because of its amino acid profile, but also its overall, its overall protein quality. And I've always found sun to be pretty expensive in relation to soy products. And as the world is looking for how we replace sunflower meal, soy is going to be probably the easiest way to do that. Again, we've got to get our producers to accept that these are the new prices per ton of ingredients, because it's shocking when we see what some of these prices per ton are now. Okay, the amino acid side, and this is where the amino acid supplementation tool is, this is what we designed it for. Yeah, I don't have MetaSmart in the recipe. So let's bring in MetaSmart liquid. Okay, and I'm not sure what the price we would have in here for added in.
If anyone has a price they want to mention that he should include on that, go ahead and just throw it in the window.
I think it's like, we'll just pick a number out of the air. It's going to be within range. Okay, so if we go grams per mcal, or we can do grams, and you see I've got a bunch of other ingredients here. Let me kick that out because I know that price isn't right. Or we can do percent of MP, but let's do the grams per mcal. And let's say we want it to be 1.25 for methionine and 3.0 for lysine. Okay, so this tells us how many grams of additional methionine we need to do that, 7.7, and 10 grams of lysine. And what this is telling us down here is, buy these different ingredients. For methionine, in this case, smartamine, I would need to feed an additional 12.6 grams. This is additional to what's already in the diet. And to do that, it's going to cost me 23 cents per day. And if I'm like, okay, I want to use that, I just click on use, and it'll add that amount to the recipe.
Okay, so Tom, Harry thinks that maybe MetaSmart is around $4 a pound.
Which would be $8,000 a ton, which would
Yeah.
put me on a metric ton basis about $8,800. Okay.
Okay, and then can you see the question window? There's a bunch of requests for different ingredients for you to try as you work through this.
What I would say, folks, is instead of me going through doing a bunch of different ingredients, if you've got the program, you've got this tool, and then you can use local pricing on ingredients. And that's really it's really important, because some of these price differentials, for example, gluten feed or gluten meal, I know areas in the world where gluten meal is so damn cheap, you're basically forced to use it. So it's really, play with it yourself, to look at these relationships. This is, there are videos on how to use this tool, correct, Marianne?
I have not done a video on this yet. I ought to.
Oh, you have not done.
Yeah, we need to
Okay.
do that. That'll be next.
All right. So
the other thing I just want to say, if you don't have the program and you're watching this, you can trial it for 30 days. And if you have already trialed it but aren't presently using the program and you want to retrial again, we would love it if you'd purchase it. But if you don't, if you want to just assess it, go ahead and contact me or Lynn, and we can arrange for another 30-day trial.
Okay. So the way this works, okay, let me back up. So this tab, you can use any feed in this analysis, but you got to have good pricing, or somewhat realistic pricing, for it to do the economics correctly. And I always love doing a mix of protein products, energy products, as well as amino acids, because sometimes it's shocking, especially when, again, gluten meal. People are like, gluten meal is a great methionine source, and it is an okay methionine source. But when we look at when we need 7.7 grams of MP methionine added, and I can do it with 13 grams of a product versus 850 grams of gluten meal. And the thing is, when I add that gluten meal, if I were to add that 850 grams, it's then going to change my lysine requirements because they're going to be, my lysine supply is going to be lower because of how poor in lysine something like gluten meal is. If we add, let's add distillers to this analysis. Okay, so for me to get that 7.7 grams of methionine, I'd have to feed over 2 kilos additional distillers grains. So it's really, well, yes, some of these ingredients can work. Our inclusion rates are so high that they become extremely expensive, like that distillers, 55 cents versus 23 cents or versus 18 cents. So it becomes what it really shows is when we're looking at these at trying to get some of these small inclusions going, especially if we don't expect them to eat more. I think that's a key thing. I could add that 2 kilos of dry matter of distillers, but that would assume that the cows would eat 2 kilos more dry matter to get there. We don't know that. So it's a lot of the times these more highly concentrated ingredient sources of nutrients, because of their low inclusion rate, are cheaper to feed. And again, it goes back to we need to be making the decisions based upon cost per animal to get to the desired nutrient levels that we want instead of cost per ton of ingredients. Because we can easily, well, here's another great example. If we look at soy versus a bypass soy, we're probably not the right price on the, let's do it with one that's got a better price on it. That will keep it in relation to soy plus isn't in there. What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. So it cost me 85 cents. Let's get rid of a couple of these. And I know I've got the right pricing so that we know we have better pricing on. Okay, so 23 cents to hit that 7.8 grams versus 85 cents. Versus soy, it would cost over $1. That was the comparison I was going to make. To get that 7.7 grams, I would need to feed almost 2 kilos more soy or 1.3 kilos of a bypass soy. And that bypass soy, even though it's 30 or 40 bucks a ton more than solvent soy, being a bypass, it's going to be, 22 cents a cow cheaper to get to the same level of methionine. Similar like with lysine, we're 6 cents an animal cheaper to supply those 10 grams of lysine by using a bypass soy. So again, we need to be looking at the differences in level of processing, those marginal differences in pricing, as they've not changed or they haven't changed much. These increased levels of processing can really help us on the overall cost per animal because we are better utilizing the nutrients. That said, since we're going to be using less of those ingredients, we've got to have other dry matter to fill in that space, be it more forages or relatively affordable byproducts, which sometimes is a challenge all by itself. So again, we need to look at the whole package. The last one that we'll talk about is really what can we do from an optimization standpoint on something like this? And that is where we really, what we've done over the last several years of playing with the with the nonlinear optimizer really comes into play here for us. To use the advanced optimizer correctly, and if you don't have the advanced optimizer, let us know. We are we're people that ask for it. We're going to open it up for a month for them to play with the advanced optimizer, because it is in times like this, it's really well worth sitting here and playing with the advanced optimizer. I don't optimize every diet every time. I do it. It used to be once or twice a year. It's gotten more frequently with that as we've looked at alternative ingredients and with how fast some of these ingredient prices have changed. It's really become a pretty useful tool in my decision making of looking at alternative ingredients. We can run any nutrient basically through it. By default, you only see the min and max outputs here. If you right click, you'll see an option that says show safe min max. And the difference here is the safe min and safe max are what we call hard constraints. The solution has to fall within those ranges to be acceptable. With some of the nutrients, we use a penalty function basically, that as you move from the min, because this is where I really want to be. I really want to be 101% of ME, okay? But it's going to find solutions that are between 100 and 101. And that penalty function discounts the ones that are closer to the safe min, but they're still acceptable answers. So it just gives us a little bit more flexibility when we're evaluating these optimizations. My typical optimization is really pretty simple. It'll be dry matter intake. I'll either do ME and NP allowable milk or ME and NP percent of required. We'll do the percent of required in this case. I really don't do NFC anymore, but I do fermentable starch. And I'll let it fermentable starch go up to like 21.5, but I'll also, because of byproducts, I may let it come down around 15. Sometimes I'll throw a sugar constraint in there if I have sugar ingredients. We typically don't. Sugar's typically pretty expensive for us in the Northeast US. Sometimes I'll do. I'll always keep this max of total fat at around 6, just so that it doesn't go crazy trying to feed them like pigs. Sometimes I'll do the 16 to 18:1 ratio if I'm focused on trying to maximize either milk fat or milk volume, depending on the stage of lactation in the herd. And if I do amino acids, I'll always start with methionine to ME, and we'll start there. Oh hell, let's throw the 16 to 18. We'll let it go to 1.5. And sometimes I'll do mineral, sometimes I won't. I will either do PE-NDF or the PE-CHOC. We won't talk about that difference for now, but we'll do PE-NDF, and I'll let it come down to 20 in this example. That is pretty much my constraint set. I don't do things like RDP. I don't do things like total starch in the diet or anything like that. If we think about all of everything related to the models tied up behind the ME and NP percent are required. And then just by throwing some of these other limits on, it's kind of to ensure that we maintain rumen health, and some other biases that I may have towards some nutrient flows. When we think about why would I be doing the methionine to ME, maximize milk protein production, the fat ratio to manipulate milk fat, and even some of the data out there, milk volume. And the only other thing I would potentially add on a regular basis would be like DCAT, and have a minimum of like positive 250. So it's not a huge constraint set, but it's pretty encompassing of everything related to the model. Now, this optimization is not the fastest in the world. I mean, it is a really complex solution, and you see it's going to run about 26,000 iterations on here. So typically this would be time to go get a cup of coffee. But let's see what it does. And while we're waiting for that to run, we got any questions that we want to go through?
And while we're waiting for questions, I'm just going to mention that if you want your optimizer turned on, email Lynn or me, and we'll turn it on for you for 30 days so that you can see how that works. So Tom, isn't it too risky to follow fermentable starch without looking at NFC limits?
Why? What's NFC? Silage acids, sugar, starch, soluble fiber. And with most of the ingredients that we have, I don't have lots of sugar sources. So my sugar and my dietary sugars are seldom going to be over 4 or 5%. Total starch, depending on the corn, let's take corn, if I take a finely ground corn versus a very good steamed flake corn, my dietary starch could be exactly the same, but my fermentable starch could be, with the cornmeal, I could be at 18% fermentable starch, and my really good flakes, I could be at 21%. So I could actually feed less of that flake corn to get the same level of total fermentable carbohydrates going into the cow. I used to also include NFC just as kind of this upper benchmark, but I moved away completely from that, and will actually constrain more on fermentable starch, and then where I've got decent sugar sources or decent sugar pricing, also on sugar. It's NFC is basically just we've had those guidelines for years because that's what we had. Whereas with working with fermentable starch, we're actually describing those ingredients on a more biological basis for the animal. So it works really well. I can't say I've ever, let's see, let's look at this example. I don't have NFC as a constraint, so it won't show it. None of these will be high NFC diets. And you look, the fermentable starch is a pretty good range of 18 to 20%. And but I'm really starving on trying to get ME. And we're going to see a lot of that this year. We're always struggling to get energy into these animals. So are we going to be, typically in those cases, we would feed a little bit more protein, like soybean meal to let that starch, let the sugar from the soy contribute to the energy pool. But I don't know, are we going to be able to do that well this year?
And Tom, what about using UNDF as a constraint?
All right. That is where I wasn't going to go there, but I'll say this. If I'm going to try to incorporate something related to U. I use PECHOC, which is physically effective carbohydrate C, which is a mix of the UNDF 240s, and because if we don't have in vitro digestibilities on concentrates, it'll use the lignin times 2.4. So it's a little bit more overall encompassing of just using U. The problem with U is which U, okay? And that is, you know, I been so frustrated the last several years because people have jumped on to, well, we want to maximize the amount of 30-hour NDF digestibility, or we want to minimize the amount of U240. The problem, folks, is there's many problems with that. One of the biggest ones is if we look at the work that's come out talking about using UNDF, that is based on UNDF 240 numbers of the TMR that have been analyzed. We don't have that data. You know, when we look at the definition of UNDF within the model context for forages, it's a 240-hour NDF digestibility. For a concentrate, it's 120-hour to represent the endpoint. So we have incomplete data. So if you start using UNDF as an index or as a constraint, it's not all inclusive. If you want to look at something like that, then use within AMTS, use carbohydrate C. Because we use, okay, this carbohydrate C is that mix of the NDF digestibilities, the in vitros, and where that data is missing, it's using the lignin numbers. Whereas if you use UNDF in here, that is just of the U of any feeds that have the chemistry inputted for the NDF digestibilities. Okay, so you can get yourself kind of, you can get, it can get real messy if you've only got the NDF the digestibility time points, say for one feed. Well, these numbers are going to look really odd. Okay, so in that case, if you wanted to go down that path, and you know, use carbohydrate C. And typically, what we find is somewhere between 10.5 and 11% carbohydrate C is when we start seeing intakes go down. The physically effective carbohydrate C, there's a bit of a regional thing here. If I'm talking Northeast US or the US, most of the US, areas that are corn silage, alfalfa, or an alfalfa grass mix, I'll have one range. If I'm dealing in areas that are high in ryegrass, really good ryegrass silage, silage, grazing, the numbers are different. Just because of the differences in chemistry of grasses versus legumes. So that's why I wasn't going to talk about it. It's, if you want to know more about that, email me and we can discuss that more.
So Tom, that last optimization didn't complete. It didn't finish.
Yeah, it did. It did.
They're
It finished, but there was no
unable.
it,
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
it didn't.
satisfied all of the
Right.
traits.
Nothing that, because we're starving on energy.
Okay. Why is that? Why the original is better than the optimized one?
Well, is it? Well, yeah, income over feed cost, it definitely is. Yeah, because we're so starving on energy on because of our ingredient selection, that we can't really move there. So yeah, that's I wouldn't be happy with any of those solutions. So I'd go back and look at what constraints I had and see what we can do. But it starts to show some of the rape didn't come in at all. Gluten feed did come in. That's an interesting one. I actually brought in sun in this example, which I find is interesting. Yeah, no canola. See, it brought in some cotton. So it would have to be back going through all of my constraints as to what would be to try and figure this out more. But we're starving on energy and space.
I just want to mention again, we do have a series of videos on our YouTube channel, and Tom did an excellent one on using the advanced optimizer. Oh gosh, maybe a year ago, that is up there, and he goes through it, doesn't get a solution the first time, and so he went back and tweaked. This is not press a button and feed your cows. This is relying on you to be a nutritionist still, but yeah, check out our YouTube channel. We'll send you a link.
So, with that, folks, I'm going to say we are, we're at 2 hours.
Yeah.
If you have questions, contact us. But utilize the tools, and between the amino acid supplementation tool, the optimizers, the feed pricing tool, they are going to help us considerably as these ingredient prices move in the direction that they have, and because we really don't know what the new floor is going to be for acceptable feed prices going over the next 6 to 18 months. And like I said, there's going to be lots of challenges with ingredient supplies. So we may have to do more of these types of analysis more frequently to address the needs of our farms. And we need to be discussing with our farms, especially in the Northern Hemisphere now as we're entering cropping season, the importance of getting their forages done timely and correctly and stored well. Those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, allocation, more and more, do more feed sampling, be looking at alternative ingredients. I know in some parts there's some wild ingredients that pop up. Local byproducts, local art can be awesome. Unfortunately, they tend to follow corn and soy prices. So there's the opportunity for saving money with those is really pretty limited. And be looking at processing, be it converting dry corn to high moisture corn can be a great system if it's done correctly. Advanced processing either through better flakes and one of the best ways to evaluate flakes is looking at how thick the flake is of corn. We should be targeting around 1 millimeter flake thickness. There's not many places that do that. But we need to be looking at how do we extract as much nutrient out of these ingredients to supply the nutrients to the cow to keep these diets financially viable. And just be prepared for anything over the next year. This is going to be a wild ride.
Tom, do you have more?
No, I am done.
All right. Well, I just want to mention to everybody that I have put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat discussion. So if you can access your chat, you'll see that. I will also be sending an email out as soon as I have this processed and up on YouTube, and that won't take long because I'm not going to make any changes. So that will be there for you, and you'll have it in an email of it for everybody that attended. Thank you all for questions and hanging in there. It will also remain on our Facebook page. The fact that we went live to Facebook will be, the video will be there for however long. And Tom is giving you all sorts of information on how to contact him. Do any of our, so we have a fair number of our panelists still left. Sam had to hop off, and Teresa did as well. But if any of you panelists who are able to unmute have any sort of questions, go ahead and contact us. We will be giving you a 30-day trial of the Advanced Optimizer if you contact us.
Okay, folks, there's my email, Lynn's, Marianne's, and whatever, pick your flavor of social, of Messenger, you know, WeChat, WhatsApp, Telegram, Apple iMessages. Just look for me, all under the same phone number. Oh yeah, and Lynn
Add
also.
support, yeah.
Okay, or you can just email the support site, and then that goes to all three of us. Questions, if you have specific diet questions, you know, anything like that, reach out. That's what we are here for, folks.
Yep.
And with that, I hope you all have a great day, no matter where you are in the world. And I look forward to being able to go visit some people once things start figuring out how. I can't go right now. I don't have my passport. It's being, I sent my passport in to get renewed. So who only knows how long that'll take. Everyone stay safe, and we will, we'll talk to everyone later.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.